Welcome to the Subjective Preacher podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 207, and it's Sunday. So we're going to read from First Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 to 10, and we're going to talk about money and faith. Okay, here it goes. But godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we had food and covering, with these we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare, and many foolish and harmful desires which plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some, by longing for it, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. All right. So, yes, I am aware that my preaching doesn't sound like preaching, and it's more like a college lecture. My daddy would even say that to me when he was helping me out and giving me tips on preaching, but I can't help it. This is just the way my brain works. And I'm taking all of the lessons of my dad, of seminary, and trying to say something that might be beneficial to at least some of you some of the time. So, anyway, a lot of young people today think that rich people are a problem, right? So they are the source of a large number of problems. So some say that taxes should be raised even to the point where they take all of those rich people's wealth. There was a meme going around, Anthony Davies, where, and this was a couple of years old, so the numbers are a little bit different, but there are about 550 billionaires in the country. And if you were to take and confiscate all of their wealth, it would pay for about 7 months of the annual government's budget. And I've talked about this before. So once you have pillaged and plundered all of the billionaires, what do you do next? I mean, how are you going to fund the government for the remaining 5 months? Well, just pillage all of the millionaires. But then after that, there's no one left. And then what do you do the next year, right? You've already took everything from the billionaires and the millionaires. So where now is your revenue going to come from? So that whole activity is foolishness, really. And this type of virtue signaling hides their love of money, right? So they pretend that they hate money, but in reality, they love money. And we all know from verse 10 that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So let's think about this, right? First of all, I've got to say this, and I'm going to pick up the speed because there's a lot to say. What is money? Money is actually an innovation. It's an invention to make buying and selling or trade easier. There are several characteristics of money, but two of the ones that are relevant for today is that it stores value and it itself is used to make other things. Um, so anyway, it's a unit of account as well. But money measures value, right? So based on how it stores value and the demand with regard to that, commodity, money measures value. Okay. So why do we need money, right? Now, a lot of people say, oh, we can just barter. No, we need money. We need money because, as it says in verse 8, we need money for food and clothing. Helping others requires money. That's the easiest way to help other people, especially when they are far away. We have to remember, we're human beings. And so we consume things, right? So we might have food today, but once you eat it all, you need to get more food. You have clothes today, but eventually they're going to wear out. And so you're going to need to buy more clothes. So either we make all of the things that we need, or we work to have money and then buy the things that we need. keep in mind that we did not create the society. We did not start the society. We don't have that option. We were born into an already existing society. And so we have to figure out what needs to be done to make money. In other words, we have to find a job. Working is the character of human life. We know this from the curse of Adam, right? By the sweat of your brow, right? So we got to work. The human life is all about working, right? And we have to figure it out quickly because we don't have a lot of time. If we could live forever, like we had endless time, which is not the same as eternity, but if we had endless time, then, you can figure it out today, figure it out tomorrow, no big deal, right? Starvation wouldn't even really be an issue because you can live forever. So you'd be hungry a lot, but eventually you'd be forced to do some work and then you can feed yourself. Now, we don't live in that kind of life, in that kind of world. Our time is short. And so we have to figure out and discover what we need to do, what that is, what our job should be, and then get busy creating value. And so this question of what is it that we have to spend our lives doing, is really a question of how do we use our time, and for what do we use our time? According to verse 6, it says, "Godliness with contentment is great gain," right? So the problem, though, of people, as I always mention every Sunday, is that we're tainted with sin, right? And because of sin, most all of us are ignorant, right? We got to learn everything that we know. We have to figure out everything that we know. And for a lot of people, simplicity uh, is the goal, right? Simplify everything, or that is extremely desirable. And so a lot of people then mistake dollars for money, right? So people think that they are working for dollars. And so then people think that dollars are the goal. It is the benefit. It is the value that we should be pursuing. And also, a lot of people will think that once you accumulate enough dollars, then you'll figure out the meaning of life. And so people are now striving for dollars. But working for dollars is not the same as making money, right? So it is sometimes the case that working for dollars doesn't make money. Instead, you destroy money, all right? In other words, we got to get a job that creates value, but often, especially these days, we get employment that destroys value. And because of ignorance, people do this in earnest and they teach others to do it as well. Now, destroying value has become kind of a fashion trend. It's so trendy that, the love of money is hidden in the virtue signaling, as I mentioned earlier. So people pretend to hate money, but in reality, they love money. But the biggest lovers of money work for the government, right? And so people who strive for political power, the first thing they do when they get into office is create inflation, right? Oh, got to spend some more money. Inflation destroys value, right? So I said this before, but maybe for not for my Sunday listeners, in 1970, when we were still kind of on a kind of gold standard, the average family income, annual family income was $9,500 per year, right? So the annual, that's redundant, I know, but just in case you don't, redundancy is good. So the annual family income was $9,500. In order to have the same standard of living today as they did in 1970, you would have to be making roughly $580,000, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, right? But to have the same standard of living as $9,500 of 1970, you need to be making close to $600,000. In today's terms, if you told someone you were making 600,000 a year, people would say, "Wow, good on you. You are making a lot of cheddar." But in 1970 terms, you're just like everybody else. And so the inflation has destroyed the buying purchasing power of the currency that we're using now. And so all this time, people were thinking that they're getting raises, that they're making more money, but in reality, the purchasing power is being stolen from them by people in government, right? People who really love money to the point where they're going to take it from you. Now, verse 9 and 10, if you look at that, but those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare, and many foolish and harmful desires which plunge men into ruin and destruction. That's what they engage in, right? So they're evil, politicians, people work in government, except for a handful of people. The rest of them, right? They have corrupted society. And now so many people who live in society who would deign to call themselves Christians, now they advocate for the biggest destructive things that you could possibly want and desire and do in this world. That's what they want. They want war. War is the most destructive activity of humanity, right? Because you do it on a large scale. A lot of effort is put into making things, producing things that destroy value, right? Bombs, right? Oh, it's like, oh, what's your job? I make bombs. I produce something. Okay. But what do you do with that bomb? That costs a lot of money to make. Oh, I go and I destroy things of value in other countries. That is ultimately unproductive. Not only that, but there's the pollution, there's the loss of life, put it in other terms, right? All of these things destroy value. Pollution destroys value. Killing other people destroys value. This kind of activity does not lead to contentment. It does not lead to satisfaction. People don't get happy doing this kind of stuff. And if they are, they're lying to themselves or they're twisted. So there's no blessing in this kind of environment where you are destroying value. No matter how much virtue signaling you do, you will never be able to make up for all of the value that you have destroyed. Now, those of us who live by faith, we know that money is just a tool. It's a tool that measures and informs us. So while we're alive, we use it, but we can't take it with us, right? As it says in verse 7, for we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. It's just a tool, right? Money in and of itself is not the goal of life. It's supposed to help us to do what we're supposed to do in life, right? But it also is supposed to help us find what is actually valuable in life. It's not the goal. It's not the source of satisfaction and contentment. It just helps us, in a way, to find what has value, right? It measures. So, for example, if you're doing an activity, right, making a table, for example, and making the table yourself costs more in terms of time, resources, whatever, than simply buying at the store, then in a way you have destroyed value. Now, the exception to this would be that you're retired, right? And the wood came from the tree in the backyard, all right? And it gave you lots of pleasure and a sense of reward for making the tree, okay? In which case you're creating value for yourself, right? It's not like you're going to make lots of money, but you're creating value for yourself. And so that's the thing. Assigning a price to things is a reference, but it's not like this sort of all-encompassing way of finding value. Now, chasing what has no value, right? Like chasing money will only take you away from God, right? It does not bring you closer to God, right? Prioritizing money or dollars, right? Fiat, is not going to take you to God, right? It's not going to be like, well, especially for those who are in the prosperity gospel part of the church, that is not going to take you to God because it's the love of money, right? And we all know that the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. And some, by longing for it, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So loving money, puts you in a bad situation. Chasing money or fiat leads to many, many problems. And we who live by faith, we know that Jesus is the way. Jesus gives us meaning. It's by faith that we can live for what comes after life or after death. Right? Jesus teaches us that you know, the day we die is not the end. After there's judgment. And, if we live by faith, then we get to live eternally with God and Jesus. And so what we do here on earth is to give witness and testimony to others on how to live, right? In other words, we have to teach other people that there's more to life than money. And we do this by living lives which create value, right? We steer away from those activities which destroy value. Right. So this is what we do with faith. We learn Jesus Christ, right? We learn the message that he has given us. We learn the gospel. We learn that we're all, infected with this sin. We're corrupted. We're filled with ignorance. What we think is good is not actually good. And we misunderstand things. Like we think that dollars is actually money, and then we live for dollars. And people who pursue dollars relentlessly become politicians. And then other people then use politicians to increase their fiat. And what they do is they heavily engage in inflation, which then works out badly for everybody, including those politicians and those corporate interests, right? And so what we do is living by truth, we seek out, live for, and then testify what are the things of value. We steer away from those activities which destroy value, such as lying. Lying destroys value. I mean, it does lots of other things, but I mean, if we stay on the creating value versus destroying value, lying, and there are many, many different varieties of lying. I've talked about it before, right? So lying by omission, those kinds of things, lots of different kinds of lying. Uh, all of those activities destroy value. In the short term, it might seem like you're preserving value, maybe, but in the long run, you are destroying value. Believing lies, right? So there's lying, but then believing lies, which happens a lot these days, destroys value, right? Because you give support to the lies, and which then looks like it has some kind of legitimacy. And so you draw other people into believing the lies. Betrayal, betraying each other, that destroys value. Breaking a promise destroys value. Hypocrisy or using coercion, right? My two basic rules for my entire podcast channel. That destroys value. You can't find meaning by destroying value. You can't find contentment by destroying value. I don't care how much you enjoy war, promote war, or think war is a great idea. I meet people who haven't, I myself, forget about other people. I myself, I thought that war was sometimes justifiable, like a good war, a righteous war. Yeah, not anymore. I don't think that. Like, if there is an alternate solution that will mean less death at the end of it, well, that would be a better option than war. Can't find contentment by advocating war. Just doesn't happen. So, positively, that's negatively speaking, these are the things which do not create values. And what are the things that create value? Love your neighbor as yourself, right? I haven't met Putin. I think I recognize him if I saw him, but I don't know him. Maybe he's a good guy, maybe he's a bad guy, maybe he's an evil guy. I don't know, but you know, just you know, directing all my energy to destroying him and unaliving him, I don't think that's loving our neighbor, right? Because the process you got to go through in order to achieve it is extremely destructive, right? Misallocation of resources, if you will, right? You waste your time doing something which has no value. You have to stand for justice, standing for justice, right? Getting rid of hypocrisy in your life. Stop lying, right? But rather support what is just, even if it means that you're going to take a hit, you're going to eat a loss. That's what you got to stand for. This is how we create value, right? And this is what Jesus Christ has taught us, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, stand for justice, worship God, submit to his law, right? And that is how we create value. You know, each of us, according to our ability, according to our gifts, according to our opportunity, and all the other factors of our lives of who makes us who we are, right? Our identity, right? Taking all of those things into consideration, you figure out what you can do, how to maximize the value in your life. And you do this by doing something which creates real value, not war, right? And not a government job if you can avoid it, right? So doing things which create value doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be rich. But that's not what's really important. What's important is contentment. Contentment with knowledge and understanding, particularly of the word of Jesus Christ. So with that kind of knowledge and understanding, you can live with a purpose, with a goal. Now, for me, as an example, and I'm not trying to brag or anything because, I'm, I'm poor, right? But for me, my calling is teaching. So I've mentioned before, I was extremely messed up as a kid, not messed up probably the way other people are messed up, but I had questions and I had to answer those questions before I could do anything in my life. And it took a long time. And I would say I've wasted at least 10 years of my life trying to figure this out. But once I did, I realized, oh, I have to tell other people. And that's my calling, right? To help other people in the Korean community, in the Asian community, in the immigrant community, in the United States, to understand whatever is going on in society. And so for me, understanding the truth of Jesus, understanding what it says about the world, and then telling other people what I've gleaned, what I've learned, that's my job. When we figure out what is wrong and evil, we repent of it, right? Jesus tells us, if what we're doing is wrong, it's sinful, repent and then do right. When I was younger, I believe, as I said before, I believed all the trends, but figured out they were all empty and vain. Worse, because I didn't solve any problems. I created problems. And I couldn't live my life. It didn't matter what I was going to do, who I was going to be with. It didn't matter. None of that mattered if I was simply creating more problems for others. Eventually it was going to catch up to me. I saw that. And so I started my journey to try to answer those questions. But it never ends, right? Yet I am content because I know I'm on the right path. And that is the first blessing that we receive. If you determine to live by the truth of Jesus Christ by faith, you figure out what contentment is, right? It's not, oh, I'm rich. That doesn't give you contentment. It just gives you bragging rights, right? I might have said it recently, or I thought about saying it, but a lot of really extremely wealthy people, uh, feel empty. And so they need to do life-threatening things just to feel alive, which is why a lot of them do crazy stunts, like the guy who owns Virgin Airlines. He does these crazy, like sail around the world, not sail, fly around the world in a hot air balloon, something like that, risk his life. Um, that's what rich people do to find some kind of meaning and purpose. I don't need to do all of that, right? Having Jesus Christ, understanding what is value, I have contentment. And so contentment is the blessing of faith. We live by faith for what is valuable, and that is the truth, and living by the truth for what is eternal. And so it's through faith that we can understand and begin to understand that our life here is not eternal and that life in heaven is going to be more of this. I hope not. If this life is full of a lot of problems, and so I hope heaven is radically different, is eternal. And so while we're here, we try to share that message with as many people as possible, starting with our family and our loved ones. And look, I've said this before, but to people that we know really, really well, we know all their buttons. We know that if we start a conversation, they're going to say this, right? The whole conversation has a script, right? Just like talking with people who are lefties, right? Who are on the left or the woke, right? So what do? You change the script. You say things in anticipation of knowing what they're going to say, and so you approach it in a different way, right? That's where I came up with the no hypocrisy, no coercion. And once we figure out what contentment is, then we always know that money is just a tool. It itself is not the kind of evil that a lot of people say. I mean, look, sin has made everything evil in the sense that it is not eternal, right? So money is not any more or less evil than anything else in the world. But the love of money is evil. But if we recognize that it's a tool, but then we use that tool for the glory of God. And when we live understanding, living by the wisdom and knowledge of Jesus Christ, then we don't waste our time doing things which have no value. We don't waste our time virtue signaling or waste our time worrying about things that are beyond our control. No, we use the small amount of time that we have, using the tools that we have, living for the glory of God. We create value and we show people what living by the truth is. And this is how we have contentment, and this is how we have joy. So, yeah, all those virtue signalers who pretend to hate wealth, yeah, they're going down the wrong path, full of misunderstanding. But if we live by faith, we live with wisdom, with knowledge, and we pursue what is truly valuable. And doing that, we find that contentment, we find that joy. That's it for today. I hope that you have a contentment and joy-filled week. I'll talk to you next week.